Good morning. We would like to welcome everyone that is attending on our virtual debate here in Manatee Tiger Bay, and those of you who will be watching this evening on METV. Today we have Florida State Representative District 73 candidates, Incumbent Tommy Gregory and Challenger David Ferrie. We would like to welcome you again today. My name is Xtavia Bailey, and I am your president. I will be doing this debate. Now we will have an opening by each candidate, starting with Mr. Ferrie. 3 minutes, please. Thank you.
So I'm David Ferrie. My family and I have been in Florida since 2010. My wife and I have been married for just about 18 years, and we have 4 kids from ages 16 to 1. Professionally, I'm a CPA and have master's degrees in business and accounting, and currently work as a CFO for a tech company here in Sarasota. We always need lawmakers who are with financial expertise. But given the challenges we're facing right now, it's imperative that we elect people like me, credentialed financial and economic experts with vast business experience who understand how to build a sustainable and robust economy that works for everyone. I'm running to save lives and fix what's broken so that all people can truly be free. Florida's success isn't just measured by economics, but by how we treat our most vulnerable people. There's no amount of prosperity that can make up for the mistreatment of those among us who are most in need. I have a vision for Florida where every person is as healthy, well-educated, safe, and therefore as free as possible. Where a full-time wage affords an adequate standard of living for all people. Where every person is treated and protected equally in the eyes of the law. And a state that truly embraces empathy and kindness and the rights to life, liberty, and happiness. For more than 20 years, Florida has been under Republican rule. And in that time, we have seen a total failure to adequately act on nearly every major issue, from gun violence, wage stagnation, the growing number of uninsured, economic diversity, and climate change. Republican leaders have shown their priorities by cutting funding and support to education, public health, environmental protections, women's rights, workers' rights, and voters' rights. As a financial expert, I can tell you, you cannot cut your way to growth. The institutions that benefit all of us, especially the most vulnerable, are clearly expendable to them. Given this people last mentality, it's no wonder that during this COVID-19 crisis, Florida's Republican leaders failed to heed the advice of experts, which is killing thousands, has left small businesses abandoned, and left millions of unemployed workers destitute. When asked to call an emergency legislative session to help those people who are suffering, Republican leaders and Tommy voted no. When asked if the state should accept emergency federal funds for state and local governments to ensure that police, firefighters, first responders, and teachers are paid and that vital services can continue uninterrupted, Tommy said no. All of this is the natural result of Republicans holding power for the last 20 years. Without public accountability, the greedy and the powerful have been able to take, bully, and pollute with impunity. And the preventable death and suffering of our people has been allowed to continue. This isn't real freedom, and we all deserve so much better. It's time for bold, progressive change. The scope and courageousness of our solutions must match the scale of the problems we're facing. It's time that we put people first. It's time that we hold the powerful accountable, and long past time that we protect the most vulnerable. It's time that we lead with courageous compassion, economic expertise, and business acumen, not meaningless catchphrases and empty rhetoric. It's time that we embrace the true freedom of every Floridian to safely and healthily enjoy the life and liberty afforded by living in the great state of Florida in the greatest nation in the world, because people matter, not power.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrie. We will now have Mr. Gregory. You have your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Xtavia. Wow. Even if I took the entire 3 minutes, I couldn't rebut all of the things that were false that my opponent just said. So let me just focus on, what's most important, and that is what's important to Floridians. As you said, my name's Tommy Gregory. I am the incumbent. I've been proud to serve the residents of Manatee and Sarasota County in the Florida House the last 2 years. And I'm running again because I'm passionate about continuing to serve our community, our state, and our country. It's what I've done all my life, 20 years on active duty in the Air Force and 2 years now serving you in the Florida House. You know, it's not an easy job in good times. And these certainly aren't good times. We're in agreement on that. But Florida is a good place to live and to work. No, Florida is a great place to live and work precisely because we've had strong, principled Republican leadership in the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion. Thank God we have had that. Those leaders have demonstrated through the application of the principles that made our country the greatest in the history of the world to tax lightly, spend wisely, ensure that we did what we did last year, and we left Florida with $4 billion in reserves because we understood spending wisely so that we would be prepared exactly for crisis and times like this. And we did things like patient-driven healthcare reform last year, which really enabled our nurses to practice to the full extent of their training. And thank goodness we did that, because we have needed them now more than ever, and they have delivered on the front lines and kept Florida as safe as possible. It is no accident that Florida has done so much better than anyone predicted, because we have had good, strong leadership from Governor DeSantis and your leaders in the House and the Senate. You know, this past Monday was Memorial Day, and I took the opportunity to reflect on the rows upon rows of white crosses in our local national cemetery, as I hope everyone did. And it reminded me of the sacrifices that those brave men and women made. And it reminded me of a quote that I had to memorize, like all cadets at the Air Force Academy, from a great philosopher, John Stuart Mill, who told us that those that are concerned with nothing more than their own personal safety, nothing which is more important to them than their own personal safety, have no chance of being free unless made and kept so by braver men than themselves. And I hope that we remember as a society and honor the sacrifices that they made, and remember what they died for and what they protected was our American ideals. Again, what made us the greatest country in the history of the world and what keeps us so is our respect for individual liberty, separation of powers, limited government, and the rule of law. Florida has done an amazing job responding to this crisis, and Florida has done an incredible job over the last 20 years of Republican leadership, taking an education system that was ranked last in the country to first in the country, drastically improving our health care, and in the last 72 days alone, processing all of the unemployment claims. There were some hiccups at first, but now 97% of claimants have been paid billions of dollars in 72 days. The government of Florida has responded and is doing well precisely because we have Republican leadership. It would be my honor to continue to serve the residents of Manatee County and Sarasota County in the Florida House, and I ask for their support in November.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gregory. Now we will start with Mr. Ferrie for our first question. You have 2 minutes to respond. Manatee County has a lot of necessary infrastructure projects, from road widening to bridge repair, replacement. What do you believe are our most pressing needs, and what can you do to facilitate state involvement?
I think, like most residents of Manatee and Sarasota, we see that there is a lot of, congestion. I think there are a lot of opportunities to, improve our infrastructure here that, we really need to listen to local residents and homeowners associations to really get the needs that are there. I know in East Manatee County, where I live, there seems to be a lot of ideas that the state brings in that aren't really applicable to what our residents need. And we need to be serving the needs of the local communities as they exist for what their daily commute is. It's clearly informative and good to have experts come in and weigh in, but we need to be listening there and serving them and building the roads and infrastructure that's necessary and relieving the problems that actually exist for those local residents, and they should have more of a say. So the state involvement really needs to be getting resources to those local entities to empower them to solve the problems the way that work for those communities, for those individual places. I don't think that, hundreds of miles away in Tallahassee, we can just solve every local infrastructure issue here. But one thing is for certain, what we do need to be doing as a state is making sure that the quality of our infrastructure is high. So, we know that we have, an eroding infrastructure. We know that we have bridges and other places that have been, are continuing to deteriorate. And the state does need to take responsibility to make sure that there's enough resources in place to make sure that we're traveling on safe infrastructure, especially as our community continues to grow.
Finish, Mr. Ferrie?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Same question. Mr. Gregory, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I've got it. Thank you,
Okay,
Octavia.
absolutely.
It is certainly no surprise to any resident of Manatee or Sarasota County that we have a traffic problem. We do have congested roadways. We are, in many senses, a victim of our success. Florida, again, because we have great government in the sense that we recognize taxing lightly and spending wisely, and of course we have the benefit of wonderful weather and great water and many tourists, we have congested roadways. And that's why for the last 2 years I've said my number one focus is building infrastructure. And if elected again, my number one focus is on building roads. Infrastructure and roads are key. We have got to keep up with the people that are moving to Florida. And again, we're a victim of our success. We provide a great state. We're fortunate to have a great state, weather-wise and environment-wise. We provide great government. It's no surprise that people want to move here, whether they're retired and made their money elsewhere or want to come here because we're creating a perfect environment for them to be able to get jobs through our deregulation efforts so that it's not so difficult, so government's not in your way to get your licenses. Specifically, what I've already been doing and will continue to do is work with the Florida Department of Transportation, work with our local planning and metropolitan planning organizations to ensure that we are focused on the roads and the bridges that need the help the fastest. We have got to do everything we can as government leaders to address the fact that our population is growing faster than our roads have kept up with. We've got to make them safer. We've got to make them more efficient. But I will note that it's interesting that this district covers Lakewood Ranch. I think Lakewood Ranch is really an example, a role model area for transportation and what they've been able to do as a master plan community and working both with local and state officials, but they've also worked with federal officials. The double diverging diamond intersection, which everyone thought would be a disaster, has been a remarkable success. So I would continue to focus on, if elected to the House, doing everything I can to improve the efficiency and safety of our roads.
Thank you so much. The next question, we will begin with you, Mr. Gregory. The Sadowski Fund was created in 1992 to provide revenue to local governments to help improve affordable housing efforts. The revenue is funded from taxes collected from documents. Governor DeSantis proposed a $387 million budget, which I think it was 370 that it was actually filled with, for the Sadowski Fund for Affordable Housing, and which has consistently had rated and has been deleted from. In 2019 and the 2020 budget, state lawmakers funneled $125 million of the fund over this general fund. Do you feel that this housing fund should be used for its original creation? And would you be able to tell voters that you would strive to make a commitment to make sure that stands?
Yes, absolutely. The Sadowski Trust Fund, for those that don't know what it is a percentage of your dock stamps when there's a sale of property that is supposed to go under Florida law to a trust fund, and then that money can be used to help organizations that are building more affordable, more attainable housing. Now, decades ago when they passed that trust fund law, they misnamed it. They called it a trust fund, but it's really not. It really is part of general revenue, and the legislature has always used all of their general revenue funds to balance their budget. I fully support, as I always have, treating it, as the trust fund name implies, as a true trust fund and only using it for housing. You know, I've been a volunteer for Habitat for Humanity, one of the organizations that provides those attainable homes. I've been a volunteer and a board member with them for more than 20 years now. So I know firsthand the importance of this type of housing and all housing, because it is the key to living the American dream. You know, building equity in your home, providing that kitchen table for your children to do their homework around, or their own desk in their own bedroom, but a secure, stable place for them to live is a key to success in this country and anywhere in the world. So I absolutely support it. You know, 2019 was my first year in the legislature, and when I ran and when I served, I focused on that. And I will continue to do so. Last year was the first year, maybe since its existence, that we fully funded it in the Florida legislature. So your Republican and Democratic elected leaders have continued to support fully funding it. Last year, we did so successfully for the first time. I will note that the year before, you know, some of that money that was moved, in fact, all of that money that was moved, was shifted to an area in greater need. The Panhandle was wiped out the year prior by the hurricane, and the money that was moved from Sadowski went to the Panhandle, because you're not talking about improving homes. You're talking about people who didn't have anywhere to live. They had no resources. So I think that was an appropriate move in 2019. But I think the status quo is not sustainable. We have always got to focus on fully funding Sadowski Trust Fund.
Thank you. Mr. Ferrie, same question.
Yeah, I mean, I think of course, we should be fully funding it. And quite frankly, it needs to be funded with more. We need to come up with other solutions for affordable housing. I mean, I personally believe it's a human right to have an affordable place to live. We cannot be incentivizing businesses to drastically underpay workers to where they can't even afford to live in their own community. But that's what we're doing right now. So, I mean, fortunately, you know, part of when we attack this issue, we can't just talk about a trust fund with a lot of money in it. But we also need to be looking at the other structural problems that lead to housing not being affordable, and that is, you know, paying people a living wage. Now, fortunately, there's an amendment on the ballot in November that is going to lead to, you know, if passed, a $15 an hour minimum wage, which gets us closer to that living wage, so people can afford to have an adequate standard of living. Because when we allow them to make, you know, $8 and change per hour, you know, my wife and I have a good friend of ours who has to work 3 jobs. She's a single mom, works 3 jobs, and still has to rely on some assistance in order just to get by, just to make ends meet. And, you know, things like the Sadowski Fund are a great resource in our state. Obviously, it's been rated a lot. Manatee County has been a victim of that in the past. I was at an affordable housing meeting where, you know, some folks from Manatee County were talking about how, you know, they've just gotten fractions every year of what they were supposed to get. In fact, the year before, they only got, you know, about around $500,000 of the $4 million they were supposed to get from Manatee County. It's very difficult to make an impact in our community when we are taking so much. Now, I don't disagree that there are drastic needs in our state that we have to shift resources around. But there are other places we should have filled that fund with when helping out the Panhandle. And it cannot come at the price of affordable housing. Maybe it's the, you know, corporations that we give huge breaks to that can easily afford this, that have gotten tax break after tax break after tax break. So I fully support affordable housing. There's a lot more we can do, and there's a lot more we can say about it, but absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrie. Next question, we'll start with you. Being that we've had the COVID-19 and it's been a pandemic across the world, here in Florida, unemployment claims processing averages 39% compared to 69% in other states. The maximum benefit amount is also one of the lowest in the nation at $275 a week, max. Current unemployment in state is 14.7% and higher in some states. What do you propose Florida legislators do to address the challenges in our unemployment system and benefits?
Well, first of all, we have to hold the people accountable that designed the system in the first place. And look, this system was designed to fail. It was designed to be confusing, and we know that. We know that Governor Rick Scott did not invest the resources necessary knowingly to make this functional. We knew going into this that it was already a dysfunctional system, which led to people going weeks, months without any benefit. They've lost their job through no fault of their own. And in our district, we've had several people who've had to go to other representatives in other districts like Margaret Good in 72 because they could not get a response other places. They could not receive help. Now, finally, fortunately, Representative Good was able to get them the help that they need, and better late than never that they got money that they had paid into a system for. So we need to design a system that works. It's not, look, we're not reinventing the wheel here. As you noted in your question, we're one of the most underperforming states. We have one of the lowest benefits of anyone in the country. And in a state where the costs of living are higher. So, I mean, again, we're setting it up to fail. This is an effort to where when we treat state revenues the way we do, this is where we make cuts. This is where we put where the Republican legislature in the past has put their priorities, and has not been to help those who are most in need. They're perfectly fine victimizing the most vulnerable. Now, because this pandemic has exacerbated the underlying problems that have existed for years. It's not like unemployment was great before. It's just now it's shining a big bright light on a huge problem that's existed, and they've had to scramble. And fortunately, more claims have been able to be processed, but it's still not enough. There's still people I hear about every day that still haven't been able to get their benefit. And just bringing this up too, there's also not a way to tell the system, in the old system, that they had to scramble update, that you've gotten a job. You can't call, so now you're having people who are potentially going to need to have to refunding money. It's just a broken, chaotic system that was never designed to work well in the first place.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrie. Mr. Gregory?
I'm so disappointed, Xavier. I think my opponent's comments are dangerous and irresponsible. To say that a sitting senator, a current former governor, I mean, the allegation that he would knowingly or intentionally design a system to frustrate claims of people that are unemployed and in a vulnerable position is dangerous and irresponsible and false. Now, in terms of holding people accountable to make sure the system works, of course, that's what we have to do. That's what the executive has done and is doing. Governor DeSantis, when he saw that DEO wasn't able to keep up with the influx of claims, made a change in leadership at DEO and brought in additional leadership and shifted more than 2,000 state employees from other agencies to DEO in order for them to keep up with the demand. There is no doubt that DEO was overwhelmed by the sheer number of unemployment claims, which of course was natural and unfortunate. A crisis like this will always overwhelm systems temporarily. But our system and our leadership under our governor responded perfectly by shifting those resources, by adding more employees, by adding new leadership, which is why we're at a 97% paid rate. And the only reason we're not at 100 is because the number changes every day. There are new claims, but 97% is a healthy standard. And as I said, we've paid almost $4 billion in less than 75 days in unemployment claims. So it is just false to say that Florida and DEO has not responded appropriately. They struggled mightily at the beginning, but DeSantis moved resources and put leadership in place to ensure that we could respond. And I'll tie it back to the last question, talking about a minimum wage increase and the lady that David knows who is working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. That is difficult, and I respect her and I admire her. But the fact is that is a dangerous amendment. I have spoken to many leaders in this community, business leaders and owners, that say if we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, you're going to have a new problem. There aren't going to be 3 jobs or 2 jobs or 1 job for her to work, because a $15 minimum wage will drive an 80% reduction in their workforce.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. Next question, we'll start with Mr. Ferrie. Recently, the legislature passed prohibition of sanctuary cities in Florida. Do you agree with that legislation? Why or why not?
No, I don't agree.
Why not?
And why not is we have a great group of local law enforcement across the state of Florida. These are men and women who work incredibly hard. They have an incredibly dangerous and incredibly important job that I think we all respect and admire. And they do not get enough funding. They are not paid well enough for the services that they provide to our cities and to our state. And to now put upon them, the added burden of now having to, be federal law enforcement and do their job for them and use their local resources, their very limited local resources to, comply with whatever their request is, again, is a huge burden, which we hear about from, police departments across the state. Moreover, a lot of these requests, kind of violate the due process of some people. It isn't unheard of. We know that, there are permanent residents and other immigrant families who are here perfectly legally that get caught up and they are afraid. It also makes communities less safe, which, we want to talk about enforcing the law. We should absolutely enforce law. Law and order are the foundations of a functioning civil society. But when we engage in a process that makes our communities less safe, and it does that because people are then afraid to call the police. They're afraid to call when a crime has been committed, when they are the victims of crime, because they don't want police coming in and racial profiling and asking, to produce documents that they may or may not have with them, and then get caught up in this entire process. So no, it's not. And then on top of it, to dictate from Tallahassee what local governments' laws can and cannot pass, we should be putting a lot of power in the hands of local officials to determine for their cities what's best, and to legislate from Tallahassee and to tell our local cities what they can and can't do all the time. It's inappropriate, and it makes them less safe.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrie. Mr. Gregory, same question.
100%, 110% support of the sanctuary cities ban law that we passed in Florida. And the only thing that law does is tell local officials they cannot break the law. The law is very clear on immigration. The federal government here is supreme on immigration law. And when they give orders and make requests to local law enforcement officials, it is irresponsible and dangerous. Much like the earlier allegation, irresponsible and dangerous position to take to say to local officials or local law enforcement, hey, you can ignore lawful orders and requests from federal law enforcement. Ignore those. No, that is not the right answer. As David said, what makes our country great, again, is the rule of law and order. There really is nothing controversial about that law at all. We should never have a situation where a local official is asking themselves, well, should I have to comply with this state law or this county ordinance or this federal law? The answer is always yes. And the only thing the sanctuary cities law said was you must comply and follow federal and state law. It would be incredibly dangerous to live in a society where local officials elected or local law enforcement got to pick and choose which laws they were going to obey and which ones they could ignore. So I 100% support the law. I campaigned saying I was going to vote for that law and co-sponsor it, and I did all of those things, and I'm happy that Florida led the way and has the toughest illegal immigration laws in the country.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. We'll start this question with you. Pre-COVID, Florida has one of the highest uninsured populations and is also one of the few states that has not expanded Medicaid. Many more have lost income and benefits due to COVID. What is your position on Medicaid expansion?
Thank you, Octavia. Great question. There was a very clear and logical reason that Florida, under the time Governor Scott, decided that we didn't want to tie our financial fate to federal tax and spend policies. You know, Florida right now, our budget is approximately $90 billion a year. And thankfully, Florida balances their budget every year as we're required to do so. And I'm glad that we are, because it doesn't matter which party is in control of the governor's mansion or the House or the Senate. By our own Florida laws and Constitution, we have to balance our budget. Well, it is very difficult to do so now when 42 cents out of every dollar in Florida goes to healthcare expenses. And further tying us to federal rules and federal spending and federal taxing on healthcare is not going to help the situation. The federal government is the poorest example of how to appropriately balance their budget because they haven't done so in years, and they have shown zero interest on either side of the aisle to do so. The federal government spends about $4 trillion a year pre-COVID, $4 trillion a year, and their revenue is only $3 trillion. Every person in Manatee County and Sarasota County recognizes, applied to their own situation. Let's say they make $30,000 a year. They can't spend $40,000 every year. They will go broke. So tying us to a federal system that continues to go further and further in debt every year makes no sense and would really penalize Floridians in the long run in higher taxes to keep up with that out-of-control spending.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ferrie, same question.
Well, I mean, my opponent's just wrong. I mean, that's some great sound bites, but unfortunately, it's woefully and irresponsibly uninformed. So first of all, yes, of course, I'm in favor of expanding, taking the Medicaid expansion, and here's why. Number one, it will cover immediately almost 1 million more Floridians that currently do not have coverage. Second, it benefits the state by over 5 years. The state would net $500 million more in revenue than we have right now. And here's why. Number one is what the federal dollars would cover is at a higher rate than what the state does right now. Obviously covers more, but also there's a population that does receive a state benefit right now that would shift to that, being qualified under that benefit. Right now, they're covered at about 62%, and they've moved to 90%. So the state would not only have more covered from federal resources, but also state resources would be freed up. So there would be a surplus to the state of $500 million over the next 5 years if we started the Medicaid expansion in 2020. So there's literally no reason not to do it. The fear mongering over, it's going to tie our funds to all this stuff. Again, these are old talking points. These are 5-6 years old, and they've been economists have disproven them and shown time and time again. We're one of just a handful of states now that haven't taken it. There is bipartisan agreement across the country that this is the right move. You have Republican governors encouraging people to enroll in the ACA marketplace now, because when we tie healthcare to a job, and then we have 1 in 4 workers in America who now don't have a job, guess what? They've lost access to affordable healthcare. So we need to be doing more to cover more people. The uninsured rate of Florida is abominable. And I mean, children specifically in Florida have been huge victims of it. In just the last few years, more than 50,000 children have lost coverage in Florida. So we need to take it. It's good for the state finances. It's good for people.
Mr. Gregory, do you have a rebuttal?
A short rebuttal.
You have 30 seconds, please.
Thank you. Short rebuttal. First, as an economics graduate from the Air Force Academy, I know a thing or two about economics. And the important takeaway there from an economist's point of view would be the federal spending on healthcare is absolutely unsustainable. And it would be a mistake for Florida to follow the out-of-control spending of D.C. But I'm going to give you 2 points, 2 numbers that prove that Florida is doing this correctly, among other things. One, between 700 and 1,000 people a day move to Florida. Why? Because Florida is doing things the right way in tax and healthcare and every other way. And 2, the second number, those people that are moving to Florida bring $160 billion in income migration to the state every year. And they're leaving states that do exactly the opposite, states like California, New York, and New Jersey.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ferrie, Senator Joe Gruder, Republican of Sarasota, sponsored Senate Bill 126 during the 2020 session. It proposed mandating online retailers that sell at least 200 items or $100,000 worth of goods to Floridians to collect and remit the state's 6% sales tax. The bill died in the Senate Appropriations Committee. A little bit has changed since then. What are your thoughts about a state sales tax on online purchases?
That's a great question. One of the problems that our state has is we have, as a CPA, I know a lot about finances and economics. And, when we look at the health of any institution, a business, whatever it is, one of the things we look at is concentration risk, because when there's concentration of revenue or expense, you have a volatility risk. Now, the revenue side is particularly something we try to focus on, because any disruption to this, relied upon income stream, can produce a lot of jarring effects. So, one of the things that I would focus on in Tallahassee is creating some revenue diversity for us. Now, that doesn't mean, we cannot be overburdening everyday people with more taxes. That's not what they need. But what it does mean is, we need to step up enforcement. We also need to be looking at what our sales tax laws say. We should be, if people are benefiting from Florida sales, we need to be collecting the sales tax that I think the law implies that we should be doing there. We need to look at what services are exempt and what are not. We need to be looking at our nexus laws and what does it mean to be doing business in Florida? What does it mean to have a sale in Florida? And we need to be updating these things to reflect reality today. These get very complicated and very nuanced, but just from enforcement alone of current laws, the estimates are between $5 to $15 billion more dollars a year to our state if we just apply the law as it exists. So, we should be looking at all those things. And also we need to be looking at loopholes and who's been getting a free ride for far too long. And if we do all those things, we can improve the lives of so many people around here without burdening everyday people with additional cost.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrie. Mr. Gregory, same question, please.
Well, I think Senator Gruder's heart is in the right place. His goal of ensuring that mom and pop owned brick and mortar retail stores in our community, in our state, are protected and on a level playing field with out-of-state, online-only retailers is a good one. It's a good intention. It's the right motivation. But I would argue that the last thing we need is more tax dollars out of the hands of the people that work so hard to earn that money and into the hands of a government. We don't need to feed that beast and grow the government. Getting more money, hiring more state employees, growing the government, it should not be our goal. Ensuring that Floridians who work so hard to earn their money get to keep their money should be the goal. Now, if we can find a way to do that and level the playing field, I'll vote for it every day of the week. But you won't see me vote or support new taxes. If we want to lower the taxes for brick and mortar retail to match online retailers, I'm all for it. But the thing that we always have to remember is there's no such thing as government funded. I have a local business leader friend of mine who likes to remind me of that. There's no such thing as government funded. There's only taxpayer funded. The only way the government has that money is if they take it from you who have worked so hard to earn it.
Thank you very much. This next question, we will start with Mr. Ferrie. Florida has had at least 2 high-profile shootings of unarmed African-American men. The first case that we know of that was born, the organization was born, Black Lives Matter, was the Trayvon Martin case, where his shooter, I'm timing myself now, where his shooter was able to get off, and many called this murder. Minority communities are feeling not safe and concerned. How do we feel Florida could get ahead on a state level when it comes to working with the state attorneys, the law enforcement, and community leaders to combat the chances of unarmed African Americans being killed by police officers or being shot by people, and the stand your ground law is used? Mr. Ferrie.
Well, I mean, first let me just say, I don't think 2 minutes can do justice to an adequate answer to the question, but I mean, I'll give it a shot. Really what we have to look at is, the systemic racism that exists in our country. And it's just a fact that we have to accept. Now, when I say, racism exists, I think there are kind of two responses to that. And on one side, and particularly, white individuals that I've talked to have this reaction that they think racism means some intentional act that you direct at someone. And there is a failure to recognize what I think, most African Americans and people of color recognize and who have educated me is that it is a systemic issue. It isn't necessarily directed, individualized acts, but it is the implied bias and prejudice of a system that is set up long ago and that has had improvements, but is still far, far from perfect. And recognizing that and admitting we have a problem and training law enforcement with some bias sensitivity to that is a place to start. We can't be demonizing a community for calling out for justice when clearly injustice has been done. We have to be supportive and empathetic and sensitive to an issue that goes back hundreds of years, that has its foundations in the foundations of our country. And we have to appreciate and understand the structures that got us there. This isn't something that gets solved with a pithy one-liner. It isn't something that gets solved because one person did one good thing. We have to hold ourselves accountable. Law enforcement has to hold themselves accountable. And white men and women need to hold white men and women accountable. These unarmed black men, they're not attacked, they're not victimized because they're black. They are victimized because there is racism. It is not their fault. And they deserve justice, and that we must do better.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrie. Mr. Gregory, same question, please.
I've spent 14 years out of my 20 years in the Air Force as a prosecutor. So I know one thing. There are a certain number of people, thankfully small, but there are a certain number of people that are bad people, and they're going to do horrendous things and commit terrible crimes. It doesn't matter if they're a private citizen or a member of the armed forces or a member of law enforcement. They've got to be held accountable. And we have to review the circumstances of any alleged crime and hold people accountable to commit those crimes. So I would say in any scenario that you would present to me as a prosecutor or as an elected leader, I would say hold the criminally wrong accountable. But the other thing that I would remind everyone is that, again, because we are a country that respects the rule of law, and because we have implemented that in our justice system, we have the fairest system in the world. And again, in the military, I've lived all over the world. I'm in my 22nd home here now. It's my last one, but it's my 22nd home. So I've lived all around the world. I've seen systems of justice that are unfair. Ours is very fair. In fact, our system is so fair that we have created it such that it is designed to ensure it is better that a guilty man go free than an innocent man be in prison. So sometimes there are going to be circumstances where our prosecutors and our law enforcement attempt to hold somebody accountable, and because of the way our system is designed, they're unable to do so, or at least unable to for the satisfaction of the victims or the people that feel the system wasn't fair. But again, it is the fairest system in the world. It's designed that way. It works very well. So I certainly agree that Training for law enforcement is a great idea. They have an immense amount of annual training that they already receive on this subject and many others. But of course we want to train law enforcement. But we also have to train ourselves as citizens to remind ourselves of the importance of rule of law and to maintain those relationships between all communities, regardless of their color, their race, their national origin, anything. All people need to maintain peaceful, cooperative, friendly relationships with law enforcement if we're to maintain a civil society.
Thank you very much. You would have to know that, so do you suggest we hold those who stand by and watch their counterparts commit these criminal acts? Should we hold those people accountable also in the form of law?
Great question, Xavier. Are you
These
talking
are
about?
coming in from my members right
Oh.
now. So yes, the last question.
Well, I think we have to look to the criminal statutes. I think what the question is trying to get to is, should we have Good Samaritan laws? Should people be required as a matter of law to intervene to help people? And that is a hotly debated issue and question amongst legal scholars and philosophers for hundreds of years. We've seen it, again, debated for as long as we've had systems of law. But we certainly should never have a situation where law enforcement, whose job it is to uphold the law, look the other way if a crime is being broken. So if that is the question, then yes, law enforcement should always be enforcing the law.
If you do have a question and you're online, go ahead and please submit it. And yes, I will not try to put words in your mouth. I will try my best to ask your questions exactly how you're putting them in here for me. One of the comments that we had, building an unemployment system to support and anticipate this one-time generational economic issue is asking to require all retail to build parking lots sufficient for Black Friday. It's cost prohibitive and generally unnecessary. Yes, this is a problem, but it's not one that could be anticipated or the cost warranted under a fiscally responsible budget. I fully expect all benefits to be eventually paid out in honor, even if not as quickly as some would have hoped. Sorry. Real quick question. The spread of COVID-19 has reminded us much Florida relies on tourism, hospitality industries for our economy. Do you believe in diversifying our revenue streams? If so, what new industries would you encourage to come to Florida to create new jobs for Floridians? Mr. Gregory?
Well, absolutely, we have to ensure that our economy remains diversified. We will always have the benefit, we hope. We have to do our best to protect it. Our natural resources, our Florida springs pump 19 billion gallons of water every year into the state, more than any other region of the world. We do have, a substantial part of our economy driven, of course, by our natural resources and tourism, but we also have a very healthy agricultural community who can feed, not just everybody in Florida, but we can feed people across the country and export to other places around the world. But the area to really focus on, besides maintaining what we already have, agriculture, tourism, visitors, besides maintaining those, we need to build manufacturing. And the reason we need to create an environment for manufacturers to move here is because manufacturers far and away provide higher incomes and opportunities for advancement in the workplace so that you can extend higher and higher in upper middle class and be as successful as you want. So I would say manufacturing is the best place to diversify.
Mr. Ferrie, if you see me put it up, that means I'm shortening your questions a little bit so we can wrap up. Thank
Sure.
you.
We should absolutely, diversify our revenue. I mean, I've been saying this for a while. We should be incentivizing, really, our technology sector, especially renewable energy, and those that can serve our state for the long haul and solve the climate crisis problems that we are going to be facing. So we should be incentivizing that to come here. These are the highest paying jobs. The company that I work for is part of a coalition that is attempting to make Central and South Florida, in conjunction with the university system, a conduit for these high-paying technology development jobs, because the higher education system in Florida is one of the best. UF is a phenomenal school. FSU is a phenomenal school. I went to an SEC school. I went to Ole Miss, so I don't have a dog in this fight between FSU and UF, but they're both incredible institutions, and they do a great job educating the rising generation of leaders here. And we need to be incentivizing those to come here, and we need to be working with companies to come here and create an environment in our state where modern progressive companies want to be. And there are substantial changes we would need to make to incentivize those companies to come here. But we should absolutely do it.
Thank you very much. How do you feel about the legislative prevention of the voters voting on the ex-felons being able to vote and then having to pay their fees? Ferrie, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Look, the voters spoke clearly on Amendment 4. It was an overwhelming win. And, the fact that, the legislator, including my opponent, voted to undermine that law and, try to implement an unconstitutional poll tax. The legislature was advised that this would be an unconstitutional move. They did it anyway. And it's real simple to understand why it's a problem. Justice should be fair and equal for every person. Totally fine. So if person A and person B both have committed a crime, they serve a year, they lose their right to vote for a year, fine. If person A can afford to pay, the $1,000 the day they get out, and person B takes 20 years. They've lost their right to vote for 21 years versus 1. That's not fair and equal justice. Moreover, the state doesn't even keep up with how much they owe. And most of this money ends up going to collection companies, not even victims. So this courts have ruled, we've won, they should vote, story's over. And stop wasting money trying to appeal it.
Mr. Gregory, do you want to comment on that?
Absolutely. That's just completely false and wrong. The voters did speak clearly and voted in favor of that amendment to give felons who have paid back, completed all terms of their sentence, including paying all fees, fines, and court costs. That's what the amendment says. That's what the people who supported the amendment advocated and stated in front of the Supreme Court of Florida to even get on the ballot. There is no doubt what the amendment says and what it passed. The law simply implemented the constitutional amendment as passed. If it's unconstitutional, then the entire amendment is unconstitutional.
Okay, really quick, just a quick statement. USF ranked number 1 in performance yesterday by the Board of Governors of the state university system. And last question, and I'm going to give you exactly a minute and a half to close out. If you could do it really fast for me, I appreciate it. You guys have been great today. What are we going to do to balance the budget with the decrease in revenue? Mr. Gregory.
Well, there's only one thing we can do. We're going to have to cut taxes, Xavier. We're going to have to cut spending. We have less revenue. Florida requires a balanced budget. We're going to have to make tough choices that strong, principled leaders have to make. We'll have to cut spending.
Yes.
There probably have to be some spending cuts to some programs, but that cannot be at the price of programs and institutions that benefit those who are the most vulnerable in our state. Moreover, like I said before, we need to be looking at the loopholes that exist, the greater enforcement. We can increase that revenue coming in, so perhaps we don't have to make spending cuts. And then we need to be planning for the long term. So in the event a crisis like this happens, or some other crisis, like when red tide happened and affected our economy, we are prepared for it and have revenue diversity.
Okay, I'm going to allow you all 1 minute to close. And we just have a response from one of our members. A system that has the highest incarceration rate in the world is not a perfect system. We have almost 100,000 people incarcerated in the state of Florida. Over 40% of them are there for nonviolent drug offenses. 1 minute, Mr. Gregory.
Are we closing or answering that question?
You're going to answer quickly and close me out.
Okay.
And then Mr. Ferry's going to go.
Well, again, people that break the law should be held accountable. They know what the law says when they break the law. If they break a law and it's a nonviolent offense, they've still broken law that existed at the time they committed the crime. So they have to be held accountable. That's called civil society. That's called law and order. That's rule of law. That's the system we live in. A certain number of people are always going to break the law. And in terms of closing, I'll just say again, it is an honor to represent the citizens of Manatee County and Sarasota County in the Florida House. I would be honored to represent again from 20 to 22. And really, Florida, again, continues to lead the way. It's no surprise to me, the shout out you just gave to USF. Our universities and our public education system has risen, essentially from worst to first under Republican leadership. We have $4 billion in reserves last year. We continue to excel. Send me back, and we'll continue to do so.
Mr. Ferry, really quickly.
Sure. We have the U.S. is around 8% of the world population, and we've got a quarter of the world's prisoners. Clearly, it's not a perfect system. And it's said from such a position of privilege to say that it's totally fair. It's totally fair to white people, maybe, or most fair, but it's not. The point is, it isn't fair to persons of color, and that's what we have to address. Just accept, and we can do better. We're a smart, capable nation. We're a smart, capable state. We can do better. But burying our head in the sand and just pretending it doesn't exist doesn't solve anything. You don't find what you don't look for. So with that said, look, I believe in criminal justice reform. I think nonviolent offenders, we need to have a rehabilitative system of criminal justice, not a retributive one for nonviolent offenders. We need to be focused on healing them and addressing the needs that they have. Putting them in prison is one of the worst things we can do for them to actually treat the problem. We have to be goal-oriented. If our goal is so they don't repeat the problem, then we need to be focused on the best solution to get there, and that's rehabilitation. So look, people matter, not power. Vote for me. Thanks.
Thank you to all who attended our candidate debate today. Thanks to all of our candidates for being here today, Mr. Gregory, our incumbent, and our challenger, Mr. Ferrie. We do appreciate you joining us. Thank you to the Manatee Tiger Bay Committee, our debate committee. Also, thank you so much to METV for coming out and filming us today, and this will be on later this evening at 7 p.m. And thank you for Bradenton Herald and the Herald Tribune for also coming out. Please have a good evening, and thank you for watching.